Hello. Welcome to our program. We're going to take just another few moments to give everybody a chance to get all set up and join. But while we're waiting, I'd love to know where you are joining from and where you heard about this program and why you signed up. So you can go ahead and put that information in the chat if you would like to. Let's take another moment here too. All right. So I am in Carmel, and right now it's kind of cloudy and overcast, but I can also see some blue sky. It looks like one of you, Sarah, is joining us from Muncie. Nice, welcome. Anyone else care to share where you learned about the program and why you're here or where you're from? All right, I'm gonna get my screen up, my program up here. Let's go ahead and get started. So I am Amanda Wanless, and I am the Executive Director of Indiana Phenology. And I'm really excited to talk to you guys today about nature observing and the ins and outs of being an Indiana Phenology Trail volunteer. Oh, it looks like Rachel, you're joining us from Fort Wayne. Welcome. So today, this is our very first time running through this program in this particular format. So if you have any comments or suggestions at the end, let me know how that goes, and hopefully everything will run smoothly. But today, essentially, we're going to cover the who, what, when, where, why, and how of being an Indiana Phenology Trail volunteer. Along the way, listen for these key terms. We're going to talk about phenology, mention citizen science, nature's notebook, and Indiana backyard observers. Okay, so who can be a trail volunteer? This program is really for anyone, for people who are interested in volunteering as an Indiana Phenology Trail volunteer, but it's for any ages. These right here are two of my favorite observing buddies. They've been going out and observing at our Indiana Phenology Trail sites with me for years. My oldest son and my youngest daughter. So the skills that you need to be successful as an observer are really well within the capabilities of even preschool age children. That being said, this is a great opportunity for people who enjoy spending time in nature or want an excuse to linger and study the world around them a little bit more. It's perfect for master naturalists who are looking for a way to use their knowledge and share it with people. It's a great opportunity for families or groups of friends, for people interested in botany, ecology, conservation, natural history, science, you name it. There's no age limit. No one's too old or too young. We've even had observers participate from wheelchairs, great for clubs, youth groups. Pretty much anyone can be a volunteer. We're going to start off with some background information and some vocabulary. So phenology is obviously in the name of Indiana Phenology Trail volunteer. What is phenology? We'll talk about what it is, why it matters. To put it succinctly, it's really focused on the recurring life cycle events of plants and animals, living things. In plants, we're talking about things like leafing and flowering, the ripening of crops in the fields, the emergence of insects, migration of birds. All of those things are phenology. And it's also the study of these seasonal changes and their timing and their relationship with the weather and climate. We can in fact call it the science of the seasons. Phenology really happens everywhere. Anywhere there is life on Earth, it happens in the sky, in the ocean, it happens on land, under the ground. Phenology is all around us, and it's happening all the time. So phenology is things like nest building, the leaves leafing out, flowers blooming, migration. You look out your window and those things that you notice that are happening right now because it's the beginning of spring, that's the phenology you're noticing. Anyone can observe phenology. There's really no special equipment required because it's all around us all the time. Often we notice it with our senses, most obviously with our sense of sight, but our ears alert us to phenology that's happening. A couple of weeks ago, sandhill cranes were migrating over, and I could always hear them long before I could see them. So sometimes your sense of sound will alert you to phenology. Touch and taste and smell, those also can help you observe phenology. If you think of eating a juicy, ripe peach, that's phenology that you're experiencing and enjoying. That ripened fruit ripening, that's phenology. Pretty much any of our fruits and vegetables we eat, we're enjoying the phenology. And so phenology is something that's all encompassing, all around us. And often we observe it without even setting out to. It's just what catches our eye or what scent we have on that breeze that's coming by. And in fact, the younger we are, the often more attuned to phenology we are, because the world is so new and fresh and young, and we're still curious. Seasons are even part of the curriculum for elementary school. But for adults, often studying the seasons isn't as exciting. It's like you've seen one, you've seen them all. But I think if you're joining me here, you probably are still captivated by nature and by the seasons and by what's going on. I'd like to pause here for just a moment and introduce you to Sophia Letzinger. She is someone who casually observed phenology in her everyday life and as it impacted what she was doing. She was from Fort Wayne, and I received a couple of years a call from her granddaughter, and she said, my grandma had these journals that she kept, and she kept them for like 15, 20 years. And in them, there is all this interesting information about what she grew in her garden and when she harvested things and what the weather was and the temperature. And she said, do you want these records? And I was jumping up and down. I was like so excited. Absolutely, yes, because Sophia was someone who not only did she observe phenology, but she recorded it and wrote it down. And that is just so awesome. Right now, we are in the process of transcribing these journals and pulling out the phenology information for it. And we really hope to incorporate what they contain in some exciting presentations and a website that people can interact with. But if you just, side note here, if you have any records like this, or you know of someone who does, put me in contact with them. I would love to capture the information they contain. But the reason I'm talking to you about her journals is I want to read a few entries. And as I read, I want you to figure out what season she's writing about. So here's the first one. 8 below, 0 this AM. Some snow, sleet, and ice, storm and rain. Thunderstorm and rain during the night. Hyacinth almost out in bloom. Ordered strawberry plants and sweet corn seed. Can you tell what season that is? Yeah, that was actually the beginning of February, first week of February. Definitely thinking about spring coming up. I know I'm always out checking to see if my bulbs are popping up then. All right, next one. Beautiful sunny day, 84 at 3 p.m. Worked outside. The catbird came. First pea blossom, first yellow lady slipper in bloom, rained 1.7 inches, put out impatience in west bed, froze rhubarb, first firefly, first strawberry, first hived swarm of bees. A lot happened that day. What season are we in there? All right, here's the next one. Sold 14 quarts blackberries, froze 12 pints of limas, canned 7 quarts of strawberry apples, froze 24 pints of corn, canned 7 quarts of peaches, and 20 quarts of pears. She was so busy that week. I don't know if you've ever done any canning or preserving of food, but that is a lot of work. And she grew all of that and harvested it from her garden. So that was the height of summer, first week of August. All right, last one. Put out bulbs. First snowflakes. 18 degrees this AM. Everything frozen. Snow. And that one, obviously the beginning of winter. That one was in November. So how is it that we're able to so quickly identify which season these are from? It's because phenology, it's all around us. It is something that we are totally familiar with. But phenology isn't just what we see, and it's just not something passively that impacts us, our lives. It really impacts nearly all aspects of the environment. It impacts the abundance and diversity of organisms, their interactions with one another, their functions in the food web, their seasonal behavior, and even on a global scale, it impacts the cycles of water and carbon and other chemical elements. And phenology plays a role in health. So if you think about allergies, that's plant phenology when that pollen is out, that impacts us, or pest-borne diseases like mosquitoes. When those mosquitoes emerge in the spring and when they're active, the time of day and those sorts of things, that's all mosquito phenology, and that impacts us. It also impacts the different timing of plant and animal activities. It impacts recreation opportunities that we have, conservation activities, and even hazards and risks to us. So phenology is really something that is all-encompassing and really important to our everyday lives. But traditional cultures were more in tune with nature than we are today as a society, partly because they had to be, because paying careful attention to your surroundings could mean the difference between survival and death. But even though we're less aware of phenology today, it still impacts our lives, and it's a key feature of life on Earth. And it's also an indicator of environmental change of all types. Because the phenological events like flowering and bird migrations, for instance, are among the most sensitive biological responses to climate change, because the weather and the immediate environmental conditions are a big part of what cue an organism to move from one part of its life cycle to the next. So we're seeing that spring events are occurring earlier across the world, and fall events are happening later than they did in the past. And how plants and animals respond to these different conditions helps us predict whether their populations will grow or shrink in the future. And it really makes phenology a leading indicator of the impacts of climate change. To talk a little bit more about that, we're seeing spring events occur an average of 2 days earlier per decade than they did in the past. Scientists are studying this. They're seeing this trend toward earlier spring events in 62% of the species that they've studied. That's things like trees getting their leaves earlier, flowering is occurring earlier, earlier migration, earlier breeding of birds and amphibians, earlier emergence from hibernation. Lots of different species are responding to changing conditions by starting their springs earlier than they did 100 years ago or even 10 years ago. But not all species and regions are changing at the same rate, which is why it's essential to study our local phenology to understand what's happening here and how or whether it's changing and what impacts that's having on our local ecosystems. So pulling all this background information together, to be able to use, so the environmental conditions affect the timing of the phenology, and then that in turn changes to the environment, change that timing, and those changes affect all of those interrelated components of the ecosystem, and they also affect the humans that depend on those ecosystems. But if we understand the timing of phenology and the trends, we can use our knowledge to make predictions. And then we can also use our knowledge of phenology to understand the species and ecosystems and better manage them in the future. So to be able to use phenology to make predictions and to improve management decisions, we have to have a baseline understanding of what's happening here in Indiana. And our goal as an organization is really to gather historical records that exist related to phenology and make them available and collect baseline data and data going forward into the future, just this long-term data set of what's happening and when in Indiana through all of different counties and for a variety of species. So basically when I talk about studying phenology or documenting phenology, I'm really talking about documenting seasonal changes. And another way that we could put that is really documenting and telling nature's stories by capturing the who and the what and the when and the where and why and how of nature in Indiana, how things interrelate and how that timing varies from one part of the state to another, and really understanding all of those components and how they relate to each other. And to be able to do that, we need to have volunteers who can go out and help us collect data in all of the different corners of Indiana. So this is a map right here of the counties of Indiana. The green ones are counties where in this particular month we had active observations coming in. So typically we have about 35 counties covered right now. There are a few that vary from month to month, but we really would love to have data coming in from every county every single month. So we engage volunteers of all ages in documenting this phenology. We gather baseline information related to the leafing and the flowering and fruiting and the timing of that, of common native plants in all 92 counties of Indiana. We also collect data on some invasive species and then other common landscape plants that are not native to Indiana. And we're hoping to explore the timing and the long-term trends. And as I said, our goal is to make this data available to anyone, freely available who's interested, but particularly land managers, natural resource managers, conservationists, policymakers, educators, anyone who might have an use for this data, so that we can document what's happening now and can see and assess and address future changes. So we have 3 different programs that we run that engage volunteers in collecting phenology data. We've got our Indiana Backyard Observers program, which is where individuals and family can observe plants in their own yards or own neighborhoods. We have our Indiana Phenology Trail program, which we're going to focus on today, where volunteers can observe at a variety of public locations across the state. And then we also have a schoolyard phenology program where we engage schools and students in monitoring the phenology on their own school grounds. So while we all have an intuitive understanding of phenology and years of experience observing it, there's really value in writing it down and capturing it so that we can learn from it. Sophia, she kept her records in this state book. And there's a long history of people keeping written records of phenology. Even going back to Chinese emperors, there's been some scientists recently that have extracted phenology data from the poetry of that Chinese emperors wrote, and that's kind of cool. But as Phenology Trail observers, you'll be adding new chapters to the history of the phenology in Indiana, but you're not going to do it by means of handwritten records. You get to use a tool that I absolutely love that's called Nature's Notebook, which is essentially a platform for collecting phenology data. It has a web interface and a free mobile app. And all of the data that's collected goes to a national database. They have about more than 1,000 plant species that you can observe with Nature's Notebook. Plus, they have some insects, fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammal species that you can also collect data on using Nature's Notebook. They have, this number is old, but when I wrote out this information, they had more than 26 million records, phenology records in their database. All the data is freely available. They have visualization tools that are super awesome. So you can look at your own data. You can compare it to other people's data. They also have scientifically vetted species-specific protocols. That's basically instructions for how to observe the phenology of each of the different species that you can observe. Basically, this consists of a definition sheet of what you're looking for and a series of yes or no questions that you answer. And you go back to the same location and the same plants through the seasons so that we can capture that whole the whole life scale of plants and species and see how they're changing through time. So through the use of Nature's Notebook, we collaborate with scientists who are studying invasive species management, climate science, resilience, and a whole bunch of important questions relevant to the environment and conservation, which is awesome. So the data you collect is actively utilized by scientists. And in fact, we call our observers citizen scientists. A citizen scientist, well, citizen science really is any scientific research that's conducted in whole or in part by people who are not professional scientists. And citizen science is really important. Scientists don't have the time or resources to study every species in every location, and they need help. And it is truly valuable. This is a couple of years old, but one researcher calculated that citizen science volunteers contribute more than $2.5 billion annually to biodiversity research. That's what it would take to replace the effort and contributions of citizen scientists. All right, let's talk more about Nature's Notebook. This is that tool that we use to collect phenology data. And as I mentioned before, it's a way of collecting these observations in a consistent way. It is used by ordinary people. It's also utilized by professional scientists. And all of the observations become part of the database. It is a program that is, well, it's a platform that's offered through the USA National Phenology Network, which is basically a network of organizations and individuals across the country that deal with phenology information. When you are monitoring phenology, what you're observing, what you're looking at, are things like the leaves and the flowers and the fruits for plants. For animals, that's things like their activity, their reproductive behaviors, and their development. And it's really focused on the seasonal long-term changes. So we do that by studying through time rather than just a single point in time. So you may have participated in other citizen science opportunities, maybe a BioBlitz where you went out on a particular day and you looked at everything that you could find. That gives you that event data, that single point in data. What Nature's Notebook data does by having volunteers going out repeatedly is it gives us status and abundancy data. So we can really tell what status something is at any point in the year, and we can identify peaks in, for instance, peak flowering. When does that occur? And that really gives us a richness that helps us get a complete picture and understanding of what's going on. So there is, as I mentioned, you can either enter the data with traditional paper data sheets through the web application, or you can skip the paper data sheets and you can enter observations directly on a mobile app. That's my favorite way to enter the observations. It's really easy and quick. There's not that extra step of entering stuff in after the fact. You get it all done in one shot. So right here, this is the protocol and the data sheet, an actual screenshot of what they look like. So the protocol is basically the set of questions, and the data sheet is there, that list of questions. Do you see breaking leaf buds? Do you see leaves? And then you, as the observer, the data you're collecting is that yes or no, or I'm not sure. And by carefully following the definitions here, paying very close attention to them, that makes certain that we're all reporting our observations in the same way, no matter where we're observing, so that the data is consistent from one person to the other and from one location to the other. And each of the definitions has some species specific information to help you know specifically what it is that you're looking at. Because I'm sure you can easily think of two different flowers that look very different. Each species is different, and that's what helps us distinguish between them. So when you're observing what you actually do, this is what the project is. You go out to a site, you check the specific plants that have been pre-selected. At certain sites, you can search for species of animals, and then you submit your data. And that is what it is that you will be doing as an observer. Each site that we have typically is monitored at least once a week. Some sites, and at some times of year, they're monitored up to 3 times a week. But we have volunteers that visit maybe just once and at one given site and don't ever go back to that site again. We've had field trips go out and they would monitor on a particular day, and that would be their one experience with monitoring. What we're really hoping for is that some of you today will be willing to go out maybe once a month and visit your selected sites, or more often if that's something that you're interested in. But really what I'm trying to convey here is that there's a whole range of possible commitments as far as time. And we generally don't expect our trail observers to be the only ones that are monitoring at a particular trail site. That responsibility is spread among various people. All right. So when you're making observations, the basics, you're going to be looking at leafing, flowering, and fruiting. You'll be asked that series of questions, and you'll answer yes or no or unsure. So it's really easy. And then there's an optional question that you can answer that talks about the intensity of observations. And that truly is an optional question. Sometimes I don't answer that when I'm going out myself. Sometimes it's hard to give an estimate. Sometimes you're not sure. It's really truly optional, but it gives us extra information. Okay, so you go out, you stand at a particular plant, you look all around it. You use the phenophase definitions, and we'll talk a lot more about those to determine whether you see something happening or not. You record that observation and you repeat it, and that is the process. So it's pretty straightforward process. Okay, so we've talked about who can participate. We've talked about why. We've talked a little bit about the what and the how, but I want to really dig more into what it is exactly you'll be looking for and monitoring. So that is those phenophases, which is a term that just means a discrete part of the life cycle that has a beginning and ending point that you can identify. So these are those do you see questions. The first one is breaking leaf buds. And this really is capturing that first point at which that bud bursts open. You can see that green leaf tip at the end visible, and it's up until the point that you can see a fully unfolded leaf, or that leaf stalk is visible. So the first picture here, that is a no. The middle picture, yes, we see breaking leaf buds there. We see that green leaf tip, but we don't yet see that leaf stalk, that stem there. And then this last one is when we would start to say no for breaking leaf buds. Now, when you're making an observation, you look at the plant as whole. The question is, one or more breaking leaf buds are visible on the plant. So if you see one breaking leaf bud, then you can say yes. One is enough for a yes. All right, the leaves really is capturing that a whole period of time from when that first leaf unfolds until that last leaf falls. So this is the phenophase that covers the longest portion of the year, and you'll say yes to more than you will say yes to anything else. All of those pictures there are all yes pictures. One or more live unfolded leaves are visible on the plant, and it's considered unfolded once that entire length has emerged from that breaking bud or stem node, etc., and that the stalk or base is visible at its point attachment. When the leaf is fully dried or dead, you say no. So there are some trees like oak trees that hold on to their dead leaves well through the winter and sometimes into the spring. If those leaves are fully dried or dead, even though they're still on the plant, you would say no to those. All right, increasing leaf size is one that typically is at the beginning of the growing season in the spring, but not necessarily has to be at that point. It's a majority of the leaves on the plant have not yet reached their full size and are still growing larger. So once the majority of the leaves are full size, then you're going to start saying no to this one. Colored leaves, this is one that you would typically think of in the fall, but there may be other times at other points in the year when you'll say yes to this. The definition is one or more leaves show some of their typical late season color or yellow or brown due to drought or other stresses. So you don't include small spots of color due to leaf damage or dieback on branches that have broken. And you don't include those fully dead or dried leaves that are on the plant. But there are some plants that I have discovered that always have colored leaves. Some of my garden plants, I don't know if they're stressed or don't like their location or they just cycle through, but I have found myself saying yes to colored leaves more often than I would have expected if I hadn't have been looking for it. All right, so those were the leaf phenophases. They do overlap. You can say yes to multiple of them. You evaluate each of them independently. Next, we have the flowers phenophases, and then the fruits. These are the ones that have to do with the reproductive structures and reproductive cycle of the plants. So this one is one or more fresh, open or unopened flowers or flower buds are visible on the plant. So this includes that whole period of flowering from when those buds start forming until those flowers start fading. And it's a all-encompassing category here. The next one is open flowers, which is just a portion of that flowers or flower buds phenophase. This is the open flowers one. One or more open fresh flowers are visible on the plant, and they're considered open when you can see those reproductive parts between or within the unfolded flowers, and you don't include dried or wilted flowers. Once they get to that dried or wilted stage, that's the end point of open flowers, and you start saying no to it. And then last we have the fruit phenophases. There are two of them. There's the fruits phenophase, which is one or more fruits are visible on the plant, and this includes unripe and developing fruit, and it includes all the way up to the ripe fruit. The ripe fruit phenophase is one or more ripe fruits are visible on the plant. Now you'll notice for the fruits phenophase, fruits look very different on different species. So the definitions themselves will have species specific information to tell you what you're looking for. This picture right here is tulip tree fruit. On the left, the green one, that is the unripe developing fruit. And then the brown one is once it has ripened and it starts to open up. And you can see information to help you identify those in those definitions themselves. All right, let's do a quick review here. Remember, it's important to pay attention to the definitions of those phenophases because that's really going to tell you whether you say yes or no. It always comes back to reading those definitions. And I even, though I have been using Nature's Notebook for 5 years now, I still go back and refer to those definitions all the time, particularly when we're at the beginning of a phenophase, at the beginning of the spring. So here, take a moment, look at these. Can you match up those phenophase names to those pictures? And I'm noticing that there's one on here that I didn't talk about specifically, but I hope you can figure that out. So there's the breaking leaf buds. The one I didn't talk about is initial growth. So on plants that die back to the ground each year, perennials that die back, or on annuals, initial growth is that phenophase that kind of corresponds to the breaking leaf buds. And it's that initial first growth peeking out of the ground, and it's before that first leaf has fully unfolded. So hopefully you were able to match all those up. Here are the flowers or flower bud or flowers and fruits phenophases. I'll give you a moment there to see if you can match those up. And again, there's one on there that we didn't talk about. That's pollen release. There are some plants, particularly the ones that are allergens, that have an extra phenophase that's called pollen release. And the reason we keep track of that one is so that we have information about things that are related to allergies and can capture that information. So as you are monitoring various different plants, really you just pay attention to what's on that data sheet or in the app and the definition that goes with each of those. But I hope you get the sense here that this is relatively straightforward and something that you're already somewhat familiar with. All right. While you'll be looking at the same phenophases for different types of plants, it's again important to keep in mind that they look different on each different type of plants because the shape and size of the leaves or the form of the flower or look of the fruits are really what distinguish one plant, one species from another. So here, if you notice, these two trees, we've got river birch and redbud here, they have very different fruits and very different flowers. So to help you be able to identify the different phenophases on different species, we have created what we call phenophase photo guides for most of the species you'll observe. And these just have information. They're just information sheets with the photos along with the definitions to really aid you in correctly identifying those phenophases. All right, so let's go a little bit more deeply into making observations and let's try it out. So you'll look at your plant, you'll use those phenophase definitions to determine whether you see that phenophase or not. You'll record your observations and then you'll repeat. So right here, there's that data sheet, yes, no, question mark. That's how it works. With animals, it's very similar. We have a couple of locations that really were interested in the interaction between the particular management activities that they were engaging in and their restoration work and whether that was bringing in new species of birds. And so they have added those to their sites as what to monitor. The way you do animals is it's a checklist of species, and it's, do I see it or do I not in the whole space of that observation site that's been delineated. And then if you do see a particular species, you can answer these additional questions. Did I see it calling? Or did I hear it calling? Did I see it eating fruits or seeds? Those types of things. If you didn't look for something, you can leave it blank. If you looked for it, but you didn't see it, then you would say no. The same thing with plants. If you didn't look for it, just leave that question blank. But if you did look, you say yes or no. And then if you really are not sure, but you looked for it, then that would be when you would put that question mark in. All right, so let's give it a try here. On the left, we have the Phenophase photo guide, and depending on what size screen you happen to be watching this on, you may or may not be able to see that. But we've got a picture of the breaking leaf buds, the increasing leaf size, leaves, colored leaves, flower buds, open flowers, fruits, and ripe fruits on that. And then in the middle is that picture. So take a moment here and look at that picture and see if you can answer those questions. All right, let's see how you did. Okay, breaking leaf buds. We don't see any breaking leaf buds in that picture. And in fact, if you look in the background, you can see some green leaves. So this was flowers later in the year than this plant normally gets its flowers. Yes, we see leaves there. We don't really see increasing leaf size, but it's hard to tell. There might be colored leaves, might not, but we can't really tell if they're falling leaves. Do we see flowers or flower buds? Yeah, we do. And none of those flower buds are open. Ooh, goodness. I'm noticing that I put this in here wrong, because right in that middle, there is one pod. Do you see that right there? Oops. I'm not sure I can use my laser pointer. Right there. That is a ripe fruit. So really this should say, yes, we see ripe fruits. Yes, we see fruits right there. Okay, how'd you do? Did you get some of it right? Does this seem like something that you have within your ability to do? Hope the answer is yes. Let's take a little moment to look at some phenology data that's been collected by our trail volunteers and explore what we're learning from it. So what we have here are what we call phenology calendars. They show when we saw leaves and flowers and fruits on these different plants. There's a bar for each day we made an observation. The bottom axis is it's a calendar, January through December. Sometimes we show a calendar with a gray bar showing we made a no observation, but these are I'm just showing the yes observations right here. So basically what we've got on the left is we can tell what time of year Virginia bluebells had its leaves and its flowers and its fruits. And you can quickly see here that by the time we hit the middle of June, right there, Virginia bluebells is done. It's gone. We don't see any sign of it anymore. It's gone back dormant. Virginia bluebells are definitely a spring ephemeral there. And we only see them in that range between March and June. And if we look over here at this other one, this is common milkweed. That top is the leaves, the green, then the orange there in the middle is when we have flowers, and then when we have fruits. And you can see that these two plants have very different life cycles, very different timing on when things happen. And that's one of the things that makes nature so awesome and interesting and endlessly exciting to explore, because each plant, each species does things a little bit differently. They have their different niches that they fit into, and different roles that they play in the ecosystem. And by studying the phenology and having a phenology calendar, you really can explore some of those trends and understand a little bit more about what each species is doing in its in the landscape. Let's see, here's another one. This is an interesting one, comparing the phenology of a particular species from year to year. So on the left here, we have that calendar. The green shows the leaves, the orange shows the flowers, and the pink shows when there were fruits on this red bud, which is typically a spring flowering species. And then on the right hand here, what you see are 3 different years, and I'm just looking at when there were flowers on the tree. So we've got 2019 on the bottom, 2020 in the middle, and 2021 on the top. And you can see here that they varied in when they started flowering depending on the year. So 2019 was really late. It didn't start, we didn't start saying yes to flowers or flower buds until in April. Whereas on 2020, it started well into the beginning of March or middle of March. And on 2019, interesting thing is over here, on just 2019, there was flowering at the end of the season in fall, in September to October. So for whatever reason, that particular year, conditions were right that it had a second set of flowering. And by studying the phenology, you can see when that's typical and when that's atypical. And if you compare that to the weather and what's going on in that particular year, you can learn some interesting things. All right. So Indiana Phenology Trail, where do volunteers monitor phenology? We have these different public sites around the state. We are actively seeking additional public observation sites and collaborating with different places and people that have public locations and needs for phenology data. We're particularly looking for people to help monitor at Holiday Park in Indianapolis, at Wabashiki Fish and Wildlife Area in Terre Haute, in Columbus at Touch the Earth Natural Area, and then we have two sites in Johnson County that we are just opening up this year. This will be the first year of observations, and we really need volunteers who can help regularly monitor the phenology there. Johnson County Prairie, these plants have not yet been marked for the season, but they will be soon, and we'll be opening that one up. These are the different species that are being observed at that prairie site. At Province Park, we have a site over on the bridge along the Franklin Greenway Trail, and then we are observing a variety of species in the Province Park Arboretum. At Wabashiki Fish and Wildlife Area, this is approximately 1 mile length of a trail, and we're looking at box elder and cottonwood, buttonbush, ash, maple, and sycamore there, just along that trail. We have these plants that are really centered around the nature center and the parking lot at Holiday Park. This is our longest, our site that we've been monitoring at the longest. And then there are 3 different areas at Touch the Earth Natural Area. There's one around the pond and in the forest up on that north loop, and then a meadow area near the parking lot. And these are some of the species that they're observing at Touch the Earth Natural Area. And as you can see there, each of those flower structures looks a little bit different. All right, where else can you observe? You can observe wherever you'd like as an Indiana backyard observer. We have that training coming up for our backyard observer program. in, I think it's next week. And that really helps you pick the plants and pick the site and then set everything up in Nature's Notebook. You can be a Phenology Trail volunteer, and you can also observe as a backyard observer. Okay, so how do you get started? There are really 3 easy steps. You create a Nature's Notebook account, you select the site you want to observe at, and then you start observing. As I mentioned before, you can either use the app or you can use the web interface. We're going to focus on the app here, and I'll send you some additional information that tells how you can get to it through the web interface. But the app is really straightforward and easy and friendly and saves you extra steps. So I highly recommend using the app. A useful thing about the app is that you don't have to be connected to any signal when you're out in the field. You can upload, it'll automatically upload your data when you get back to Wi-Fi or signal. All right, so step 1, create your Nature's Notebook account. You do that by downloading the app. Anywhere you get your apps, it's a free app. And then you will join Nature's Notebook. You put in a username, an email address, and a password and click join. And then the second step is selecting your observation site. So some important language here. Our Indiana Phenology Trail volunteers are using Nature's Notebook as a tool to record phenology. So you are a volunteer for Indiana Phenology, you're part of a group. So once you have created your account, it'll ask you, it says, welcome to Nature's Notebook. Would you like to join on your own or join a group? And you click, I'm part of a group. And then you will search for the observation site you'd like. All our observation sites are nested under Indiana Phenology Trail as the main name of the group. The first time, you'll only see that welcome screen that first time you open up the app. If you want to join another site or observe at a different Indiana Phenology Trail site, you can always click this join a group button, and then you can scroll through the list, or you can search for the site that of your choice. Also important to note that there are 2 different types of sites in Nature's Notebook. There are the group sites that are public sites where anybody can observe and it's already pre-set up. And then there are also personal sites, which are sites that only the person who created that site can ever see the plants that are listed and the location in Nature's Notebook and make observations at it. So we do have some of our groups utilize group sites, and some of our groups utilize, some of our programs utilize private sites. What you see here on the right is my personal screen in the app, and there are a lot of groups listed. These are all of the groups that I've joined. Most of them are sites that I manage, but this list will reflect, this list right here will reflect the sites that you have joined and will look different depending on what you have selected. All right, then we're on to make observations. We've talked a lot about this. Using the app, this is what it looks like in the app. It has along the top, right up here, these different tabs: groups, sites, animals, and plants, and observe and review. So you start on the left and you just work your way through it. So I'll walk you through that really quickly. So you'd log in the first time. You'll have to click yes to connect to your Phenology account. Along the groups section, you'll select the one that you want to observe at. So right here, this says I want to observe with the BSU FSEEC group. And then you can click go to sites, and then you would pick which site you want. Some sites have multiple different observation areas. Most of our Phenology Trail sites don't. Touch the Earth Natural Area has 3 different sites within that group. And so you would just make sure you were on the right one on that sites tab. So it starts on the group on the left, then it gives you a selection based on that group on sites. And then that populates the plants and animals tab, which gives you a list of everything that's available there. You can click on any of those plants or animals and it'll give you that species profile and protocol. And then the next tab is where you do your observing. And you'll notice along the top here, there are plants, then there's animals, and then there's the site visit details. And right now it's blued out. That means we're on the plants thing here. So basically you just go down here and you'd put, you'd say, yes, I see young leaves. No, I don't see flower buds, and so on down. And then you would click on next plant and go to the next plant. Useful thing to know, there's this mark all phenophases as no button. That's useful because then it just puts a no all the way down, and then you can change that to yes when you see a yes or a question mark as it happens. It saves you from pushing no all the way down. Make sure though, if you do that, that you look for everything there. And if you didn't look for something that it had a no on, then you can click on that button again and it'll unselect it. All right. If while you're observing, you want to see those phenophase definitions, you could print out a sheet, or in the app, you can click this little I button right there and it'll pop up this phenophase definition screen that tells you that definition right there. And then it also reads you, or gives you that optional question that you can answer. Once you've referred to that while you're looking at the plant itself, then you can click close and it'll take you back to that observation screen. Basically, that's how you record observations. You can also add site visit details for each time you visit that tell how long you spent observing, whether there was snow on the ground and things like that. And there's also a review tab that gives you a green check mark when you've answered all of the phenophase questions with a yes or a no. And then there's a settings tab that you can explore on your own. For the web interface, just want to quickly go over that in the next minute or so. It's the same process, but you'll go to Nature's Notebook. You can search it up on Google and it'll come up. Then you would click Join Nature's Notebook and fill out your account there. The way that you select your observation site or join a group is down at the bottom on that screen there in the partner group section. So if you do it through the web browser, don't forget to join our group. And I mentioned, okay, so find the right screen. Okay, so if you're using the web interface, you will log in up here by clicking on my observation deck or log in, and it takes you to your observation deck. That's what they call the interface. And you can get to some interesting data visualizations through the screen. But if you scroll down to the bottom of your observation deck, once you're logged in, it looks like this. And it's very similar to the app in that it works left to right. So what you choose for sites populates all of the boxes to the right. And then this last one is where you would enter your observations. You can also get to your species profiles through this screen. They are right here on View Species Profile. And that's what the data sheet looks like. All right, so just to review, it's really easy to get started. You create that Nature's Notebook account, you pick your site, and you go out and observe. As I mentioned, we have some resources for you. Within a week, I will send you links to the Phenophase photo guides and some other helpful information for our Phenology Trail sites. We're also working to add these resources to our web page and each page for our trail sites, so they'll be available soon. You can always email me with questions. I am happy to help anyone get started. There is no stupid question. I am only an email away. Your questions and feedback also help us know how to better support our volunteers. We also share our results in monthly newsletters with anyone who's interested. We also make announcements and things there. If you are interested in receiving our newsletter, go ahead and just put your name in the chat and I will add you to that list. And that brings us to the end. Any questions? Don't be shy now. You can unmute yourself or go ahead and type in the chat, either way. All right.
I had a question.
Yes.
When you are observing animals, maybe there are instructions in here about how to observe animals, but are you just picking a location and whatever you see in at that location?
So to answer that question, on the app, you know how there was that plants and animals tab? At our public trail sites, there's a pre-selected set of animals, species that they have chosen to observe, and it's already in there. So when you're observing, you click on that animals tab and it'll have that list of species there. If you're a backyard observer, you can pick your own set of species to observe, but with Nature's Notebook, it takes the form of you pick in advance what you're going to look for, and you look for those things every time. So it's like a checklist.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? All right. Well, again, my name is Amanda. My email is amanda@indianaphenology.org. Do please reach out to me. And if you are interested in learning more about how to be a backyard observer and set up your own site, in the follow-up information that I send you, I'll have a link to that program that's coming up next week. And if there aren't any other questions, then that is it.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for coming today, and look forward to hopefully seeing you guys as volunteers.